everybody. Welcome. Rosann, it's another month of Planning by the Signs. How are
And
you doing this month?
it is fall almost. We've got one last stand of hot weather, and then I can see the temps going down. I am delighted.
I am too. We had it pretty good, as you all know. Rosann and I are in the same state, and last week it was pretty good. I was hanging out a little more than
Yes.
normal, but we also have some photos that some of our viewers have sent in, and they've been mentioning the drought. The drought this year has been tough for them, for specifically their veggies. I wonder if anybody else has noticed that drought issue coming up. So let's see some of the photos. How about we start with that, and then
Sure.
we'll start talking a little bit about this month's topic, a time to reap. And these come from Chris in Ohio. And Chris is really, truly a gardener. She's out there with her garden constantly. She's always gardening it for years. And if I remember correctly, it was her mother who helped her. Chris, I wish, was here to talk to us about her photos, but she's currently at a fair up in Ohio, a county fair. And is this just the wildest squash?
I know. I want to know about that
Yeah.
squash. I mean, from our campus garden, I can remember when we had our seed demonstration garden at the University of North Georgia. I can always remember discussing how promiscuous squashes were, and that always got the students' attention.
That's a really good point. Did a student what did these things? And she's got these beautiful, beautiful flowers. I am in love with her black-eyed Susans when she shows them to me. I those are probably, those and daisies are my favorite flowers in general. The deer though tend to like these a little too much in my yard. So
And black eyed Susies are so, I mean, they're just like Appalachians. They'll just plant anywhere and
yeah.
they just keep on keeping on no matter the circumstances.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because a lot of people have trouble planting around rocks and stones and things like that, and these are a really good option for that.
Yes,
They
yes.
and she's at the fair, as we mentioned, and Rosann and I were looking at these photos. We love these photos. These photos are so cool. So Chris, I'll give you a shout out to Chris from Ohio, another Appalachian. She this morning went around to the fair and started taking pictures of the winners. And as you can see, this one in the pink vase, it has a blue ribbon of first place. So it's really kind of cute that she did that for us. And this is really why Sandy comes to fair. Sandy comes to fairs to see the canning, the cakes, and the pies.
Yes, yes. And that fits perfectly in with the theme about a time to reap, because this would be the time of the year if we were canning, if we would be really working that stove, whether it was sauerkraut or whether it was jellies. We would hope for the signs to be in the head, um, or Aries, and this is canning Leo. Leo, I talk about killing sign Leo, but let me tell you, anything with fire during when the moon is in Leo, that's a great time to work that stove.
Interesting. That's a really good tip. So that's when we should be canning,
Yes.
is during the time of Leo, and it works out nicely, because if we are outside and not wanting to kill anything, then this works out really nice to be inside with the hot stove. And I remember my grandmother, my grandmother Craig, that she would be at the hot stove in the summer, and she didn't have air conditioning, so
I
it
know.
was hot.
Uh,
it
Yeah.
was
Yeah,
definitely.
I don't think for our grandmothers, canning in August and September was a reprieve. I remember in this little house I'm in now, how every window was open and the old fashioned window fans were going,
Yeah.
because everyone was expected to come home for whatever it was. If we were putting up peaches here in Middle Georgia or whatever we were doing, and wherever you were coming from, you brought your produce in, and the family still preserved food together. Um, And I remember, I mean, I was grown. I mean, like 10 years ago, my dad would say, okay, you're going to be home this weekend because we're cutting off corn.
The help was needed. And, you know, during our days with the pressure cookers, they were scary.
Yes.
They probably still are. I don't pressure cook. That way. I think everybody has the new fancy ones that are a little bit safer. But I just remember, you know, those old silver-looking ones with the big knobs and the steam, and you were always told, "Stay away, stay away, stay away."
Yes. Yes. And there's probably a P on the ceiling of this 1959 built house in there from the time it exploded, and I never forgot that. So yeah, my canning is limited to open water, water bath canning, and also freezing. We did a lot of freezing in our family.
It's interesting. I know that my grandmother Craig had a cellar, and it was always so odd to me that the hot kitchen, and you just open up the kitchen door, and the cellar was just a few steps away. It was so cool and cold. And that's where she put everything. It was always just this interesting mix of get it all done to put it in the cellar. And for those of you that are watching that maybe have not canned before, your ancestors have not canned before, this is how you survive winters.
Yes.
Especially in Appalachia,
Yes.
where there's lots of snow. You know, grocery stores were not really plentiful back in our grandparents' days. You couldn't just drive or have delivery or Uber Eats or something like that delivered. And if you did not can, you did not, well, let's back it up, I guess, Rosann. If we did not garden,
Yes.
and then if we did not, you know, reap the garden rewards to can, you and your family did not eat a lot. So this is an important Appalachian tradition, but this is how we survived.
And it was the number one thing that my students would always tell me at the end of every class. I would say, well, what did you not get from this course that you thought you were going to get? And they said, well, this is about Appalachia. I thought I was going to learn to can. And it's like, this is an academic liberal arts college. I don't think I can teach canning, but if you'll come to my house, we can go over that.
So I'm
glad to see that a lot of 20-something folks are getting interested in everything from homesteading to canning, you know, to beekeeping. I mean, that's a hip thing now.
Yep, and seed saving. That's one of your favorites.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
And, you know, there's reasons for it. Yeah, we always talk about this in families. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways to do it. And, you know, we do all these new fancy fangled things. And we're going to talk about something new, fancy fangled in just a second. But sometimes just as simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Go back to the old ways, the old recipes. I would love that my grandmother Craig's recipe that she wrote down for strawberry rhubarb pie. I don't know who got that. And you know, sometimes when people pass away, we don't appreciate handwritten things like that, like a little recipe card, and it goes in the trash. So
yes,
I would encourage everybody, keep everything and decide later. Let me show you a couple more pictures. This one is fantastic. This one is best to show. And it says the 175th Stark County, Ohio Fair. This is just fantastic. I am so happy Chris shared these with us. It's I guess it's just going to be a garden display, a fairy garden display that she had, and to get best of show, that's a big deal. People,
that is a big deal.
A big deal. And just some more of the flowers. I love hydrangeas. This is a good example of two different types of hydrangeas, kind of the pom-pom and the panicle that we talk about a lot. And here's a pumpkin. So we're talking fall.
It's here. It's here.
No idea how big that is either. And then I want to jump on over across the pond to one of our favorite viewers, and we like to call him Irish John. Sometimes I will call him Welsh John when we're working genealogy, because he does a lot of genealogy help for me trying to find Welsh coal miners in genealogy. But this is on his property, and this is just lovely. Now, John, I think you're in the chat. So if we come through here, can you tell us what is in the white building? What do you use the white building for? We could guess. and I think he shared a picture with us close up. I just love his pictures.
Yes.
Now, if you look at this and you see the cabin, the look and everything, I would swear that's in Appalachia and not
Yes.
south of Dublin.
Yes. And the mood also, that it looks cool. It
Yeah,
looks like there could be a mountain in the background somewhere.
and it could be. And I think, if memory serves me right, John, your backyard is the Atlantic Ocean? Maybe? No, not south of Dublin. Sorry, wrong side of Ireland there. But I know that he does have some large body of water, and it looks like in the white building,
Wow.
it looks like some squashes going on, and it looks like it could be your potting shed. That's a pretty nice one. And they use poly tunnels for carrots, cucumbers, and tomatoes.
Yes.
I've not heard of poly tunnel. That must be the white building.
John,
Irish
is that the same thing as we would call a high tunnel or a
well,
seasonal extension tunnel? Is it shaped like a hoop? Sometimes I've heard them called hoop houses because they're in a U shaped, upside
yeah,
down U. Oh yeah.
it
Okay.
kind of looks like. I think you're right. And it's just, as we say, two cultures separated by a language, a similar and dissimilar language. And yep,
Yes.
that's the white building. And I guess this is still in the white building. I'm telling you, Rosann, that you show me a picture like this, and I guarantee you, I would have said Appalachia. This is definitely Appalachia somewhere. It's just a great picture, and I love the tomatoes.
The Appalachian Studies Center out of Boone, at App State, they do a lot of cross-cultural trips and connections, looking at everything from music, to gardening and coal mining, in Wales, and also into Northern Ireland. So I think we need a field trip so we
I
can do
do.
this on site.
And you know what's funny is my uncle happens to live in Ireland, West Virginia, and I keep telling John that one day we're going to kidnap him, and he's going to have to come to
Yes.
Appalachia.
Yes.
I think we'll just do, this type of share system here where we go over there and explore his gardens, and then he comes over and explores the bounty of our gardens, our food, our Appalachian food.
Yes. It could be an exchange.
It could. Do they still do exchange students at universities?
It was, to me, it's not like it was when I was at the University of Georgia. I mean, we did long exchanges the whole semester. But at the University of North Georgia, we certainly did. The garden was popular with international students, and I could always tell when a student came to the food pantry kind of where he or she were from, because they'd say something like, I'm really looking for basil, I'm cooking whatever. And maybe it would be a student from Jamaica who would explain, my grandmother's whole yard is planted in herbs and things. And so that really showed our American students, that gardening is just not restricted. In some cultures, it's everywhere. And people
Yeah.
are accustomed to going out in the yard and picking something and
Yeah.
eating it.
And that is how they probably learned from their ancestors. Because
Yes.
we talk about planting by the signs being ancestral planting, and they keep it up. Now, those that probably moved to the big city, they might have a pot, of flowers or a small tomato plant. So I'm thrilled, like you said, to see that it's hip again to homestead. And John has shared with us, this is his fruit cage. So I
Oh,
gotta
nice.
assume, because I know John has a lot of birds, and John does love bird watching, that they would eat the berries alive off of this, and maybe deer too. So it's fascinating for me to see a fruit cage. I've not seen that around our area in Georgia, and I can see where that would be useful.
Yes, I wish I had thought about that when I was still at the university with the campus garden, because we were constantly. I mean, it was just 4 blocks from downtown, but there were critters. It just seemed like every critter in town knew to come there to eat, including the birds. And the birds can wipe out something overnight.
They can. They're hungry. So this is interesting because he says that sometimes they do get in, and he has to get them to fly out. So I'm fascinated by this fruitcake, John. We're gonna have to talk about this next year when we start planning. Now, I did kind of mention that we were going to talk about the future of gardening, and this is something that Chris, who was at the fair, shared with me. And Rosann and I were talking about this, and we're not quite sure how we feel about this, but I wanted to show it because this is something that Chris submitted to her Stark County Fair. It's an AI garden type picture, and apparently at county fairs, or at least that one, they are now accepting AI.
Wow.
And
times are changing. Continuity and change.
And I can tell you that I guarantee you our grandmothers would be, what is that? I can't eat it. I can't can it. I can't do anything. What is that? But so Chris literally wrote what she wanted in an AI engine, and this is what it came up with. I think she submitted 2 other ones as well, but this was one of the cats. So I thought I'd show the cat. It's just amazing to me what county fairs are doing now. You never know what they're going to have and what you can submit. So it's just really, really interesting to me what they have. And have you ever, Rosann, sent something to a county fair? I have not.
No, I haven't. I sure have attended. My mother entered a lot of things. She was a potter and also a painter. And so, I grew up, and that's what we did. We went to see what the ribbons were in the I think they called it arts and crafts back in the day.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because for those that maybe are not familiar with county fairs, you probably think it's all about the cows, or the horses or the animals, the pigs and stuff, but it's not. They're very big, and you will also find very odd carnival type food there, like your deep fried brownies, deep fried Twinkies, things like that as well. So again, my grandmothers would probably be, what?
No, but that's interesting. Yeah, Sandy, that is the point, that culture changes. Culture is not a living thing. We talk about what is Appalachia? Well, and just as important a question is, well, when is Appalachia? If we say, oh, it's back in the 1800s, that means it's static, it's frozen in time, and we've really romanticized it. Appalachia is then, and Appalachia is also now.
It is.
Yeah.
You're right. Hey, think about, you said it at the top of the show, that it's come back to, again, being popular for the homesteading and the canning and the seed state for a stretch of time. And I would say probably about definitely the 80s. Well, let's just take the 80s. Appalachia was not cool. It was not something you did. You had, the power of money, and you're going to the fast food drive-through, get it easy for your family and your kids. And now we're starting to look at nutrition more, and what we're doing to the environment a little bit more. And we're seeing that some of those old Appalachian ways were really, safe for our family and for our environment. So you're right. You're exactly right. It's not static, is it?
And slowing down, I think what for me, gardening or thinking about planting by the signs, it forces me to slow down and be in that moment. Are these seeds ready now? When we talk about reaping, not everything gets ripe on a Saturday when we're off work and want to walk in the yard, work in the yard. It's the difference between physiological maturity, when it's really looking old and scary, but now it's time to save it, versus market maturity when it's time to eat it. So I'm always amazed at how our grandparents and great grandparents, they were feeding their families immediately what was at market maturity. What could they sell off the back of the truck? But they were also saving those seeds and thinking, when is it going to get physiologically mature? Because if you've ever left a lettuce or a squash or anything, if you just have left it on there and say, I'm going to see what it's going to do, it will not look anything like what you would eat.
Mm-mm.
And that's, that's when you save the seeds. If you save something that's market mature, the seeds aren't mature enough to save. And so, how did our ancestors know this? They didn't take any kind of botany course.
That's a good question. I mean, they didn't. I know my grandparents; they did not go to university. My grandmother Craig didn't even finish high school, but she was one of the most intelligent people you could find for cooking, and people would gravitate towards her table, for food and her garden. It's
Yeah, I think it's something about where this knowledge resides. This meaning more the traditional knowledge.
mhm.
It does not reside, in the universities and academia. It resides, or it originally resided with the people, with the country people, with the people who were still doing it. And I think that's the precious thing about Appalachia is that some of the older ways got preserved
Yeah.
and continued to be
And
practiced.
and that was probably kind of tough because Appalachia has gotten kind of a bad rap. Along with Rosann and I are huge proponents on trying to change the narrative of Appalachia from this negative, poverty, uneducated group of individuals as a whole to helping people understand that they are a lively group. They are a traditional group. They do have high education. They do have knowledge, but they also understand and revere the past. And this is a perfect time for me to also refresh everybody who might be watching. We started this in January and kind of gave you a little bit of a bio on Rosann, but I would like, Rosann, if you could, we're kind of halfway through, a little over halfway through. Can you tell us the experience that you brought to this webcast with the planning by the signs?
So yeah, and first I want to start out by shouting out to two women who were not here, two faculty members at the University of Georgia, because we were a trifecta. I was a storyteller. I was interested in culture. We had an artist who wanted to teach art outside
Oh,
of places where it was usually taught. And then we had a biologist. And so the three of us came together and said, these old seeds are dying. The practice of seed keeping is dying out. Our elders are going, and we've got to figure out a way to communicate this to this next generation. So it was a combination of physically learning to save the seeds, physically learning to garden, and really the people I'd like to call in are the people of North Georgia, because the three of us as faculty, yes, we might have had power of the grade, but the people that really taught the class were our elders who came and got dirty with us and had us out to their farms and their gardens. So we were doing this before. I think there was one book on seed saving. So we would interview older people, not just write their stories and put them in an archive somewhere, but create art from those stories. And particularly people who, if you didn't think you were an artist, well, Dr. Dockery taught us all to be artists.
oh, that's
Um,
lovely.
and so we made these large scale textile installations that we took around to non-arty places like the Wagon Wheel. Joe, if you're on this, you know where the Wagon Wheel is. Joe and I have had breakfast there many times. And we took it to places like a public libraries or the tag office, because and the farmers market, we wanted to show our others in the community. So many people were moving into North
Mm,
Georgia. We had the come heres and the been heres,
yeah.
and usually those two didn't meet up. And gardening is a great place for people to meet and overcome a lot of differences. So yeah, that's what we did. We were able to have a seed bank. We were able to take our program and our artwork to Washington many times to talk about it with politicians. We went from there into issues of food systems and hunger. So students would just come in and say things like, "We don't understand why we can't eat this food because we're hungry." Or I would come in and our heirloom potatoes would be gone. And another student would say, "Yeah, we know who got them and she's hungry." So that morphed into a food pantry. And then when the pandemic struck,
Yeah.
that morphed into physically growing a lot more food. The biology department, and the physics department, they figured out, how we could get water to that high tunnel, how we could figure out how to put in raised beds. Students proved to me with moisture meters that had originally been used in South Georgia that all of our soil and all of our moisture was run downhill in the parking lot. And I'm a tiller girl. I love a tiller. So you're going to talk to me about no tilling in a square thing? It's like you got to show me that. And they made that data show up in pink, which was my favorite color. So the students and the elders and then the faculty, that's that made this a unique program, and I was so privileged to be a part of it.
And that was this is really brilliant. You're carrying this theme really well because, as again, we talked about the old ways. You still got the old ways. You were still teaching the old ways. You were just bringing some new technology and
Yes.
new different advances to it. But at the heart of it, the base, it was still the old ways.
And again, that's when our AI goes to the county fair.
Yeah.
What happens when we totally change our whole new way of gardening because a student decides to put moisture meters in the ground and see
Yep.
what's really happening after a rain. So yeah, they're some of the favorite things to do. We love to shell peas.
Mm-hmm.
All these things about 20 somethings not being able to work hard or not being willing to go without their phones. That was not the case with people that were attracted to this program. And students would come back from past semesters and say, "Here's why you don't want to take this class. If you don't like going outside, don't take this class. If you don't like talking to people, don't take this class." So, and of course, that just made them want to take it more.
Yeah.
So I miss that every day. I miss that youthful energy, and I miss the challenge that students would present. And I also miss that knowledge of elders
Yeah.
because I was, and the other two faculty, one was Appalachian. She was from Hang a Dog, North Carolina. You need to get her on here. She grew up with planting by the signs. She's the one that cuts her hair by the signs. So this idea that elders can come in and teach in a college university, I loved it. So Google us. We're out there. We're out there on the Google, Saving Appalachian Gardens and Stories. Sagas. That was the name of our
That
program.
was cool because you took the elders and the students, and you
Yes.
were the connector of those two. And guess what, guys? This is not only how we change the narrative of Appalachia, this is how we continue the traditions of Appalachia by getting those elders and those students together like Rosann did at the University of North Georgia. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to kind of let everybody know that caught up to our show halfway through, where we're kind of talking about what expertise we brought. And by the heart, I can guarantee you that Rosann and I, and most of you that are watching, our original expertise came from what we consider our subject matter experts, our grandmothers. our
Yes.
grandfathers. And
Yes.
okay, so let's talk about time to reap. Let me go ahead and bring up, as you guys know, Rosann, I am so thankful that you always give us a calendar, and you gave us a calendar this month on what we are supposed to do. So this is called a time to reap. This is all your hard work.
Yeah, and it's an opposite calendar this month because we've always been talking about when to plant, and we know that we want to plant in a wet sign, in a water sign, a sign like Pisces or Scorpio or Cancer, and we say don't plant in those killing signs, don't plant in a dry barren sign. And now here I'm going to say we're about to reap. We're about to harvest. We're about to start putting, if we're not going to have a fall garden, we're going to start putting that garden to bed. We're going to have to kill some stuff. And so we're going to do, as my grandpa would say, right the opposite. We're going to do right the opposite.
I love
We
that.
we're going to be looking for dry, barren, killing signs to harvest. Now, I have to say that harvesting was one of the hardest things for me to wrap my head around because, there's precious little written about this at all, but there's even less written about harvesting. And I have this calendar, in my favorite calendar, and on the back, I was still lucky enough to get a calendar that had instructions on the back, but the only instructions, let me read you what it says about harvesting. It says, pick apples and pears during the old moon, and the bruised spots will dry up. If picked in the new moon, the spots will rot. That was one sentence. Sentence two, harvest all crops when the moon is growing old. They keep better and longer. Item three, dig root crops for seed during the third quarter of the moon. Item four, fruits and vegetables gathered just before the full moon in the second quarter will stand shipment much better than others. That's it.
That's it.
That's it. So I had to really wrap my head around right the opposite because I was always looking for those sweet spots of and I did highlight those in yellow as usual because I know Sandy's going to throw down some more flower seeds.
I am actually.
Yes. And so we do have a good run of flower days at the very beginning.
I saw that. I was thrilled to see that. And I love your icons too for this map.
They were fun. And I want to point out some important days. Right in the middle, you'll see two cans. And that is representing anything canning, especially sauerkraut. One of the last things I did is that when I had to move from North Georgia back to my childhood home to take care of some things here, was to stop off, and I left in October, and to stop off and see a couple that still cans by the signs, not just plants, not just harvests, but cans.
Interesting. Okay.
And they do their sauerkraut. She said, I can't stay long and talk because Mama said today's signs are in the head. And you know what that means. And that means that the sauerkraut, that fermentation process of all kind of cabbages and onions and those type of foods of that German heritage, that is when you want to can. That's when you want to put together your sauerkraut, when the signs are in the head. So that is coming up. And there was probably enough harvested by now that you could start your sauerkraut. And if not September, surely in October. Remember, the signs come around, at least once. They're going to come around once a month, sometimes twice. Sometimes, because our calendar this year has been a little bit odd, we've started with a dark moon, and we'd end with a dark moon. And that just means the moon was waning when the calendar began, when the first of the month began, and the moon was waning when it ended. The moon cycle and our calendar is not the same. Wouldn't it be great
Yes.
if every month started with a new moon? That would be my rule if I'd made all this up.
And you could say like every 18th, you're going to mow grass or you're going to do this, but it's not the case. Now, for the canning, is that a good time? I know a lot of our viewers, and one really, really good viewer that's over on the West Coast has started to put up tomato sauce. And I know that some on the East Coast have started to put up tomato sauce. So when you say the 18th and 19th for canning, would that be good for sauces?
Yes, for anything. In fact, you could look for any fire sign for canning.
Okay.
You could look for your Sagittarius. Remember the signs as far as the elements, the earth, the water, the fire, the air. I know that sounds really pagany, but I promise you, this planting by the signs, folks, that's not where their head is.
No.
So this idea of grouping signs together comes from the Hellenistic period, comes from the Greeks, comes from the Romans. I mean, it was truly back in the day when this was codified, when this was the theory that elements were decided, were grouped according to their essentialness. So, so the fire signs, the fiery signs, that is how usually Appalachians say, not just a fire sign, they would say a fiery sign. That is Sagittarius, Leo, and also Aries. So any of those days are perfect, not just for canning, but also if you got to make cakes. I mean, you'll see that the closer we get to Christmas and Thanksgiving. I don't know if your grandma did this, but mine sure did. That pie safe is still out in our barn. And she would start in cooking, buddy. She would start in with some serious cake making and some serious pie baking. And those fiery signs are good days to do that. So so yes, anything that you're doing with canning is good on those fiery signs. When you're harvesting, fire signs are fine too, but also those signs that I never quite know what to do with, those dry, barren signs, meaning you got your Aquarius or an airy sign, or you have what are some more of the signs that are dry and also barren? You know, and sometimes these rules don't quite add up in my mind. And when I asked folks why that is, they said, "Well, I don't know. That's just how we did it."
Okay.
So Virgo is the blooming sign, but it's also barren, a barren sign. So Sandy, you could get 2 for 1 on these Virgo blooming signs that are coming up. You could save your flower seeds and you could plant some more flower seeds on those good days.
And that works well for me. And I should let everybody know that we will be talking a little bit later, not this month, about bulbs as well, because I know a lot of people plant bulbs in the fall, but so keep that in mind if you are a flower person. We'll talk about that in an upcoming show. But yeah, it's funny because I had some seeds that I couldn't find. Our garage is not the most tidy, and so as we were cleaning up the garage, I found them, and I was like, they're going in the ground. So now I'm glad that you showed me this calendar, because now I know when they're going in the ground.
And the exciting thing that's happening, or I think it's exciting, is that our calendar and lunar cycle, they're shifting a little bit, and the new moon will be very close to the first of the month. In that October, November, and December, which basically tells you I'm going to be looking for the right sign to plant those bulbs in towards the end of the month.
Yeah.
So the back of this calendar, not every calendar has a back with this information. I do want to warn you about that. Wherever you can get your calendar, pick up one, whether it's free or not. But if you're going to pay for one, ask if that information is on the back. This was one of the things I learned from the elders. His mother, Miss Ruby, an elder's mother, she was really elder Miss Ruby, and she was the one who noticed that, and she started saving the backs of the calendars with the information on them. And one day she brought all those in to
Wow.
our classroom, and we got to compare. And basically, it was the same thing.
Was it? I was going to say that is such an archival thing. It was the same.
Yeah,
Wow, interesting.
yeah. And when students went to Foxfire up in North Georgia to research in their archives, what were elders saying 50 years ago about planting by the signs? It was exactly the
Wow.
same calendar back. So on the back of your calendar, you'll find things like Capricorn, earthy, moist, productive, and feminine, or Aquarius, airy, dry, barren, and masculine. And how students, and I learned this because there was no me teaching them this, elders taught us this. We learned to think about the signs in clumps. We had our airy signs, our watery signs, our fiery signs, and our earthy
That's
signs.
how I know it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how we were able to start making sense of this, because it can seem very complex. But if that was one of my keys, is to understand what each clump of signs were good for. And yeah, there are some that just absolutely break the rules. I will Gemini, which is a dry, airy sign, but that's when you plant the beans, because elders would raise their hands and wave. You want it to go high. And it was somebody grow high. It was someone on this podcast that said about the
Yep.
doctrine of correspondences from back in the day, things that look like other things. One reason we do sauerkraut when the signs are in the head is not just that it's a fiery sign, but a head of cabbage is about as big as a head. Um, and if you've ever seen the rows and rows and rows of cabbages that are in Western North Carolina, you go through the little valleys, and in North Georgia, there's some cabbage eating folks.
It is
Yeah.
impressive. And I will say that you can kind of venture in also a little bit up into the Shenandoah Valley from North Carolina. As Rosann mentioned, these are our German ancestors that brought
Yes.
this over. And I think it's really important to note that both Rosann and I do genealogy. So you'll hear us bring in words like ancestors and ancestral planning. But when we're thinking about it, we're not only thinking about the documentation, but we're thinking about where they came from. A lot of people think that Appalachia is strictly and only Scots, but it is very cultural. I mean, you will even find Hungarians
Oh,
and
yes.
Ukrainians and Welsh and English
Yes.
and Irish as well, but you will find a lot of different. And then we also have some of the slave culture that, unfortunately, they were slaves here, and when they were free, they brought in their culture, their planting, their foods as well. So it's a really interesting mix. Don't always assume that it is just a bunch of Scots.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was quickly disabused of. This nature that it's all Scots Irish. You know, one could make the argument that because there were 6 Scotch Irish presidents, that culturally Scots Irish have had a huge influence. But please don't forget about the Germans. Don't forget about the people from Wales.
Yeah,
And the Hungarians, especially when you get into any kind of mining area,
I was going to say.
people from all over the world.
And Italians. I can't believe
Italians.
I forgot Italians. Italians
Yes.
are definitely, there is in West Virginia, this coming up this weekend, there is a huge Italian red sauce and white sauce
Yes.
competition that's going on. And this is all the way back. I talked about the pepperoni rolls and the miners, but this red sauce competition is serious. And if I told you we was smack dab in the middle of West Virginia, you'd say, come on now, Sandy. And I'm like, I'm telling
Yeah.
you. So, Rosann, I'm glad you mentioned that our miners brought in the cultures.
And if we can think of the fact that gardening. One of our seed keepers said this. I invited him to go with me to the University of Georgia. I was going from Dahlonega to Athens to make a presentation about this, and I said, "Well, I just can't do this by myself. I need the real expert." And so I invited one of our elders who's Ms. Ruby's son, and he said, "Well, I've got to invite my wife because the garden is just an extension of the kitchen."
Yeah, it is.
And
And
so,
how many of us have heard kitchen gardens?
yep, yep. And this idea that Appalachian food cultures or food ways, if we're going to use the academic folklore term, food ways, how do we get food to the table? We can hunt it, we can trap it, we can trade for it. We can now go through with fast food for it. We can can it, we can freeze it. What are all the ways that Appalachians have traditionally gotten food to the table? Well, then you got to think about, well, who are Appalachians? Well, where is it? When was it? And definitely I think the most interesting cultures to me are the mining cultures because they had camps of people from different places who came from all over the world.
And
And
they were
they've got,
mixed in together. It was a lot of people think that there was segregation, just cultures. I'm not talking about black and white, just cultures, and it's not. They were all living next to each other. So I'm glad you mentioned that because those cultures help form a newer Appalachia.
and so when you say, what is Appalachian food? Well, my goodness, that's a loaded question,
That is.
because where are you talking about and when are you talking about? There are scholars who are foodway specialists, and they have argued that maybe there needs to be a bean pea line in Appalachia. And towards the south, we ate more peas, and I mean field peas, not green peas like
Yeah.
John can probably grow, like our Irish John can probably grow more wonderful garden green peas longer. But in the northern, as you go north in Appalachia, people eat beans,
Mm-hmm.
a lot more beans. So somewhere in Appalachia, there's the bean pea line.
Yeah. And we might not ever know. If you guys have been watching for a while, last year we had a huge coal mining series, and one of the shows was a coal miner that actually lived in a coal town. And they had to have gardens because you could only buy something from the coal mining store, the company's store. So the garden was a way that they could supplement. And living in a coal town is not easy. It is not easy. You're paid in coal money to the company's store. So it's just a very difficult life. But one of his precious memories is the Hungarians that lived next door and taught his mom how to make goulash.
Wow.
From things from the garden as well. And that kind of opens up the conversation of you never know what this culture, this food way, and the foods that you're going to find in Appalachia. So for those of you that come, and we're going to try and kidnap John over so he can experience it. Yes, we will have cornbread. We will have beans and cornbread. We will have all different types of cakes and pies for you. But you might find Hungarian goulash, our style, or you might find a red sauce from the Italians from the coal mines and things like that. So, I love that when I hear people canning this year. I've already talked to a few people. They're doing salsa. Salsa is a huge and the tomato sauce. Got to use those tomatoes somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I remember one of our elders gave us a Cuban pumpkin.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought, what in the world? Well, when we think about, again, culture changes, it's not static. And somewhere along the way, from the 1960s, they had gotten seeds from some Cubans who came seeking asylum. So when you think of Appalachia, is almost people moving in, people moving out. It's like a shift of people who carry not just their seeds in their pockets, but their foodways with them. They want to eat the same thing that they ate growing up. And my father came to Middle Georgia in the 1950s. But if you fed that man, he thought the best meal in the world was fried potatoes, cornbread, and soup beans. And he would always say, when we cooked that, ain't no president eating better than this. So yeah, that our food and what our taste buds know and remember as children, that's important. That's like deeply important. And that's, I think, is one of the defining cultural aspects of Appalachia is
You
the
know, it's
food.
funny that you mentioned that because we had something like that last week, and I remember talking to my mom, who was at the table, who's from West Virginia, and my father-in-law, who was at the table, who's from Minnesota, and I was like, "Did you all used to drink buttermilk often?" You know, so the conversation came into when they started drinking buttermilk, and my father-in-law came down to Alabama. Guess what? Beans, cornbread, and buttermilk.
Yes. Yes.
But
And
it
if you,
is a memory, isn't it? It's ingrained in us.
yes, it really is. And yeah, it's really important. I'm getting hungry, and I wish John would hurry up and get here so we could throw him the my dad always said he wanted his sweet potatoes with his cornbread and buttermilk. And I thought that was such an odd combination. And he said, that's what we did. We were trying to get sweetening every which way we could.
Oh yeah.
And sweet potatoes, he said, was in the fire, and then later on in the stove. That was always being baked. And the family story is that my father, bought his mother the first non-wood stove.
Really?
Yes. And my grandfather, he did not want to eat those sweet potatoes that were cooked in a regular electric stove. They didn't taste right. So even as our technology changes, our tastes change. If you've ever eaten food over a fire,
You
cooked
know,
in a fire, it tastes different.
I had not even thought about that.
Tastes
That's
different.
fascinating, and he would recognize it.
So I would love to hear if you're canning and what you're canning, and if you can by the signs or harvest by the signs. I will have to say that we met far fewer people who canned or harvest by the signs than we did who planted and who cut their hair or went to the dentist by the signs. And it might be that maybe it was because there wasn't that much on it in the calendar about harvesting and planting. But that was always one of our questions. We'd ask the elders, do you harvest by the signs or do you can by the signs? A few would, but most of them said, when I was a kid, when I was a child, we did everything by the signs. But now I just plant by the signs.
Interesting.
So it seems like there's a tradition that is a remnant that clung on in Appalachia, a couple of millennia past the Romans and Greeks, but and now there appears to be a remnant of the remnant. So
That's a good way of putting it. And
yeah.
we're talking about pies and things like that. And Rosann is already planned October. In October, we're talking pumpkin boards and one of my favorites, pies. So that'll be a fun month coming up. If you are watching this live, thank you. If you're watching this after the fact, we thank you as well. And if you are watching after the fact and want to answer our questions, you can. What do you can? How do you can? How long do you can? Do you can on the sign of, for example, Leo, as Rosann mentioned at the top of the hour? Then let us know. Please drop us a like and a comment on our webcast. But also, if you want to have more information on a more frequent than just once a month, down below is Rosann's Instagram. And it's fantastic. She gives you tips throughout the month of what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. So definitely sign up on her Instagram. And I guess that we will see everybody then next month for pumpkins, gourds, and pies. If you have any questions, anything we talked about, let us know. If you have any pictures you want us to showcase,
Please
just drop
do.
us-
I would love to. I would love to see what you're growing, what you're harvesting, what you're canning.
And we would love to see not only just in Appalachia, and even if you might not plant by the signs, you might be doing it and you don't know it. So anywhere around the world, show us what you're planting. We love to see it, and we will see you guys next month. Thanks again, Rosann. This is a great.
All right. Bye-bye.